Let's go Los Angeles Rams now. Last year, when we were previewing, right around this time, just they were one of the bigger stories to keep an eye on. Remember last year, they went into training camp and it was just rookies everywhere. They couldn't even fill their positions. They felt like a team. They were coming off a disappointing 2022 season, which followed their Super Bowl win, and it felt like, well, maybe they're just starting to pay for all of those go for it seasons, and they're going with this massive youth movement. What can Matthew Stafford and Aaron Donald and Cooper Kupp, the stars surrounded by all these rookies, what can they do? And before you know it, you have Puka Nacua, emerging as a future star. You have Kyron Williams emerging as the every down back that was like a complete difference maker for that offense. And they were competitive, and they make it to the playoffs. And now Aaron Donald's out, and we'll pay our respects to Donald in a second here. But now we're talking about a Rams team where so much of that youth last year stepped up. They've sprinkled in other free agents around them this year, and they look like a dangerous team, all while Aaron Donald retires this offseason. And, again, I would just want to, pay the respects to the impact that he's made throughout his career, but, fascinated by this Rams team as they head into next season.
Yeah, and the other element last year was the offensive line was pretty good. That on paper looked like a really problematic unit, and this is an offense that has been undone by problematic offensive lines in the past. Sean McVay's system does not appear to be the same as the Shanahan system in terms of how much it can protect that offensive line, and it has been undermined by that group in the past. But actually, their line last year was pretty good, and suddenly it gave them the platform to work from. Kyron Williams, Puka Nacua, Stafford, the entire offense was able to work, and they didn't kind of rest on those laurels. They went and upgraded that group this offseason. They targeted the offensive line. They didn't just relax and say, all right, it's better than people thought it was. We're good. They actually went and made sure that line can be that level again. So, yeah, I think the Rams are interesting because Puka Nacua was the surprise package, but is now absolutely a really important part of that offense. But the two most important players on the offense, Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, they're each a year older, and Cooper Kupp is another year removed from that amazing season that he had where he, the record-breaking type of season across the board where he just crushed all numbers from a wide receiver standpoint. He's getting on a bit. He's had injuries. Matthew Stafford obviously is getting on a bit and has also had injuries. So it's just that part of it, I think, is a little bit more fragile every year until they're able to, or until they, eventually end up moving on from Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, Stafford has been banged up and playing through injury, I think, for the majority of the last few years. Remember, last year they said he was the healthiest he's been. He did have a little thumb injury in the middle of the year, but I thought Stafford was awesome last year. I thought, since he's joined the Rams, other than 2022, when really the offensive line had a different iteration every single week, Stafford has played much more consistent football. He used to be a guy whose highs were unbelievably high, but the majority of his play was just a little bit below that top tier of quarterback. I thought Stafford last year, absolutely fantastic. He's been dealing with a little hamstring during preseason now and at camp. Something to keep an eye on, as you mentioned, as he's gotten older. He's had backs. He's had all sorts of different injuries to keep an eye on. I thought the way they built their offensive line was another interesting tidbit here. They found PFF favorite Kevin Dotson last year almost for nothing, and now he's making $16 million a year. They bring in Jonah Jackson for $17 million a year, really solidifying the two guard spots, $33 million per year across both guard spots. Move former guard Steve Avila into center after a good rookie season from him. They have a chance to be a very good offensive line, with maybe the biggest question being at left tackle there. But yeah, I think the offense will be good. And then those on-off splits last year of Kyron Williams, when he was on the field, this offense was completely different. Kyron Williams, the guy that didn't test well, he's not big, he doesn't do anything well on paper, doesn't look good on paper. He just gets out there, runs hard, runs their duo scheme that they leaned into a lot last year, just runs it extremely well. And the whole offense was like a whole different offense once he was out there last year. So yeah, I think the Rams will be good on that side of the ball, assuming health across the board here.
And now they have a potential Kyron Williams clone in Blake Corum out of Michigan, the rookie that a lot of people said reminded them of Kyron Williams. So they've got a backup Kyron Williams in case the first one goes down.
One other sneaky move here, I think that's good, is Jimmy Garoppolo being the backup quarterback. I don't know why I just anticipate Stafford to have injury issues throughout, every single year at this point. But Garoppolo is a backup, man. I think he can come in, and Garoppolo's been he was outstanding in San Francisco statistically, right? Hit a ceiling, but you give him good playmakers, and I think he can produce. And again, if Puka Nacua is out there and Cooper Kupp, we didn't get to see a ton of those guys together. But when we did, those guys are tough to cover for opposing defenses. If Garoppolo has to play, I think he's got a chance, to hold the fort for a little bit if Stafford misses time. But defensively, I think the biggest story, Aaron Donald retires, and the Rams are just like, all right, we're going to draft 4 defensive linemen and do the what people call money ball in it, and replace them in the aggregate, replace them with their first 2 picks of Jared Verse on the edge, Braden Fisk at defensive tackle, and then spend 2 more draft picks on the defensive line and say, hey, that will replace Aaron Donald. Is that enough, Sam? How good has Aaron Donald been, or what was he during his career?
Yeah, we can't replace Aaron Donald, but maybe half of the Florida State defensive line plus Kobe Turner equals Aaron Donald in the aggregate. That's the math. That's Brandon
right.
Beans over there doing on the whiteboard. It's going to be fascinating. Like, I feel like people got complacent with just how good and how ridiculous Aaron Donald was in his career. It's like that LeBron fatigue, right? You get bored of him being the best player in the league every single year, so you kind of stop giving him MVP. You start looking for reasons to go somewhere else. Whereas realistically, Aaron Donald was Defensive Player of the Year basically every year he was in the NFL, right? He only won 3 of them, but it wasn't because he didn't play at a Defensive Player of the Year standard every year. It was simply because nobody likes doing that. Nobody likes getting to the end of the year and go, well, obviously Aaron Donald is still Defensive Player of the Year. Same reason, other people won Coach of the Year, even though Belichick's just stacking Lombardi trophies on the shelf over there. Like, other people were winning. You get bored of giving it to the same guy. But what doesn't change is every year Aaron Donald is out there, teams are dedicating most of the week to game planning against Aaron Donald, right? Going into a game against the Rams, figuring out how do we stop this guy from ruining our day. And that was particularly evident, I think, within the division. Teams that played them multiple times a year. What the 49ers used to do in terms of game plan, there were whole sections of the Shanahan playbook that are simply not there for games against the Rams because they know you can't run this play against Aaron Donald. It won't work. And you have to run all these things so that he can't influence the play. All of that's gone now, right? Which means there's a whole section of playbooks that are now back on the table. And there's also a whole world of extra attention that used to go to Aaron Donald in terms of double teams, triple teams, plays going in his direction, extra help. That's now freed up to potentially go to Kobe Turner or simply be distributed around the defense. And now all of those other guys are going to have a harder job, right? The rookies, Byron Young on the outside, Kobe Turner on the inside, all of these guys have a more difficult job because Aaron Donald is not there every single snap to take all of that attention away from them. So I think we're going to get kind of reminded by his absence just how impactful he was, even if he wasn't getting 20 sacks in a season.
And we used to talk a lot about how you could quantify some of those things, which are tough to quantify, but you would see guys like Dante Fowler would come in and have a 15 sack season, which he had never approached anywhere else, or Leonard Floyd would come in and have 10 or 12 sacks without great pass rush grades from PFF, but they'd finish plays because Donald was the disruptor up front. I just want to highlight Kobe Turner, who you keep mentioning, 3rd round pick last year. He had a PFF grade in the green as a pass rusher every game from week 12 on, finished with an 83.2 overall. Comparable type season to Jalen Carter, who obviously got a lot more hype as a 1st round pick, but Kobe Turner was an absolute find for the Rams last year. And it's a whole bunch of 1st and 2nd year defensive linemen now because you have Jared Verse coming off the edge, Byron Young in his 2nd year coming off the edge now. Braden Fisk, who the Rams said, hey, next year's 2nd rounder is worth moving up about 10 or 12 spots in the draft this year just to go get Fisk, a guy that I know some other teams were looking for in the 1st round. So I think the Rams look like they are literally adding 2 first-round defensive linemen. It depends on how you really view Fisk. But again, I think that's how they're viewing this.
You can argue that.
Two first round linemen to, come in and help replace Aaron Donald's production and build from that. So I think that's one of the bigger stories for the Rams is they get young on that side of the ball and, spread the wealth, so to speak, rely on a lot more players than just Donald. And then you have in the secondary, you bring in a Tre'Davious White and, taking a flyer on White, who has had so many injuries, but when he's healthy, he's one of the better corners in the NFL. Bringing Darius Williams back, a guy that's had a very productive career playing on the outside as an undersized corner. Rams have had success bringing some of their former players back after they go elsewhere. They weren't able to dabble in free agency the last couple off seasons because of all the go for it type of season. So I think it's a nice mix of some veterans and some youth on both sides of the ball here for the Rams.
Yeah, the Darius Williams addition I really like. They know where to play him. Outside corner, even though he's undersized, he's small, and he's been really good when he's played outside. So I think that's a great addition. I don't want to take anything away from the season Kobe Turner had last year. He was genuinely fantastic, but it's impossible to argue that his job is not going to be significantly more difficult this year because Aaron Donald is no longer there. Like, that's the only reality that the Rams are dealing with, that everybody's gig is now more challenging because Donald is not there to individually wreck shop and take all of that extra attention from opposing schemes, from opposing offenses. Now that's on the table to be moved around to whoever's causing the most problems.
If we start to paint a best case scenario here for the Rams, again, I just want to highlight, how good I think Stafford was last year. And, when he is feeling it, he is able to make special throws, not just like, oh, this is this flashy thing. We're talking arm angles, tight window throws, creating plays that shouldn't be there. And last year, he had bad stats. I don't know, 6 or 7 games in the season. I always say, I don't look at stats. I didn't know his stats weren't that good. I was just watching him play, thinking this is the best ball he's played in a while. If Stafford keeps that up and you do get a full year of Puka and a full year of Kupp with this new offensive line, a full year of Kyren Williams, this offense has a chance to be special. And then if the youth comes together on the defensive side of the ball, I don't think they need to be great. They need to be good enough, And so I think there's a world with this Rams team. I'm not saying they're the 2021 Super Bowl champion Rams. I don't think they have that kind of depth on the roster, but it has a chance to be their best team in the best case scenario, their best team since the Super Bowl in 21.
Yeah, and actually, in a funny way, I think that kind of is their best case scenario because, realistically, their best case scenario is this team is a playoff team, and that's what we're looking for. But unlike a couple of other teams that's the best case scenario for, the Rams and particularly Matthew Stafford have shown that they're capable of getting to the postseason and then getting that run, right, of 4 games where you get the best version of Matthew Stafford. And the best version of Matthew Stafford is able to beat guys like Joe Burrow or Patrick Mahomes or, the best quarterbacks in the NFL, go on a run and beat teams in the postseason that maybe the team wouldn't beat if it was just baseline play, baseline talent level. So, we don't know that about Kirk Cousins yet, right? That was always the theory. That was what Minnesota potentially was buying into was, okay, let's get to the postseason all the time and then hope we get the best version of Kirk Cousins there. And 4 games of the best version of Kirk Cousins is championship level. The Rams, it's not a theory anymore. We saw it happen. Like the best Stafford played at a different level during that Super Bowl run than he played at the rest of that year. So I think that is their best case scenario is they make the playoffs and then catch Matthew Stafford at the best version of him. And that's enough to beat potentially better teams in the postseason and put themselves in a Super Bowl again.
On the worst case scenario side, it's unfair. We could say for every team, hey, if their starting quarterback gets hurt, of course. It just feels more relevant with Stafford, who's battled injuries, throughout his career. I think that is part of their worst case. And then, of course, again, we go back to the defensive side of the ball, the inability to replace Donald or the Tre'Davious White move that I love because he's a good player, but my brain doesn't always weigh the injury risk. There's been an injury risk there for Tre'Davious White. So some of their biggest players, Kupp, Stafford, White, have battled a lot of injuries over the last few years. I think that is a piece of their worst case scenario, in addition to maybe the youth movement on the defensive side of the ball in particular just doesn't hit the ground running right away.
Yeah, it's an easy out to say, an injury here or there sinks this team because it's true for most teams. But because of the injury history to Stafford and even beyond, the last couple of years, like that dude has battled injuries throughout his entire career. Like he's always been banged up. And now the Cooper Kupp has had a couple of injuries, and that's becoming a bigger part of his profile. A significant injury to either Stafford or Cooper Kupp probably sinks this team over the course of the year. I know that Puka Nacua picked up a lot of the slack last season, but realistically, this team is it's a very hard ceiling, I think, if they don't have either one of those two guys for any period of time.
Key position group for the Rams. I mean, we've talked about it quite a bit, but I mean, it's the D line for me. I'm a Jared Verse fan. I thought I liked Laiatu Latu and Verse better than Dallas Turner. A lot of people had Dallas Turner as the top defensive player in the draft. I liked those other edges better. I think Verse's power is going to play. I like Fisk. He's a little undersized, but he just dominated the offseason from the workouts to the Senior Bowl and was very productive throughout his 5 years of college. So I think there's the right pieces there, but they have to produce. They have to produce early. There's a lot of pressure on that young defensive line, so I'll be keeping an eye on them as the key position group for the Rams this year.
The key position for me, I think, is left tackle Alaric Jackson. He's the one guy that still seems like a potential problem there. Now, we thought that a year ago, and he wasn't. Like, Alaric Jackson, I think, was much better last season than people were expecting him to be. He still wasn't great. He only gave up 1 sack, but he's had PFF pass blocking grades now for his sort of 1.5 starting seasons at 69, 67, below 70, which is okay. It's fine, but it's not great. And his run blocking grades have been much worse than that, below average. So I still feel like there's the potential to get, a not great run from Alaric Jackson, and suddenly Matthew Stafford is under pressure a lot coming off the blind side, and, it sort of, again, undermines the whole offense a little bit. But maybe I'm just being harsh on old Alaric Jackson, who is a young player who's been fine so far.
You have to pick someone. You had to pick someone as a key player here, so I think that's fair.